Good morning and welcome to CUESEF 2021. If you are just joining us, don't worry, we will get you up to speed. It has been a phenomenal week of listening and learning and sharing with each other as we consider how we might forge a future that is not only equitable, but one that is in its freedom, accessible to everybody, something that we not just reimagine or something that we reform, but maybe something that we create that is fresh and new and not born of anything that we've known before. We have chatted with some of the most phenomenal scholars of the past week, and we've chatted about what it means to sit with our own history. We've talked about what it means to grapple with that history. And we've talked about what it means to reckon with what those contemporary ripples mean for us today. And has asked us to all be reflexive. What hand have we played in today's meaning making? And what hand will we play in the future of meaning making and being? And part of that is taking a look at one's level of responsibility. And beyond responsibility, the ability to be imaginative, to be hopeful, to be thoughtful, and really to be inclusive. Today we have joining us Dr. Tony Mitchell, Marimba Malayans, and Salah Uddin, three people who have, and it's not hyperbole to say that for a lifetime, they have committed themselves to the education and liberation of all people, particularly those who have been most marginalized by their identities, who come into the world wearing the thing that gives them pride and the thing for which people will persecute them. And so we appreciate their dedication to today. We appreciate the longevity of their commitment. And we appreciate the optimism that even though they've been in it for a while, they continue to carry because it is palpable, it is infectious, and it is necessary for us to move forward. And that energy is not something that doesn't come without a cost. It comes at a great cost. And so as we think about forging ahead, think about self-care, think about caring for one another, and thinking about how only that way we can build something that we can all share in together in good health, mentally and physically. So I invite you to sit back. If there are questions you might have, use our multiple platforms to offer those questions and comments. And I ask you just to remove all of the boundaries and borders of your thinking and allow these scholars in today's conversation to force you into a new way of thinking and being. And so I'm excited now, and I'm thankful now for what will come. And we appreciate you for being here. And so now I will turn it over to a friend and scholar with whom I'm so pleased to be sharing in this moment, Devonna Shannon.
Good morning. Good morning. And thank you, Derek. Thank you. Definitely a lifelong friend, scholar, colleague, all of those things. My name is Devonna Graham Shannon. I am a graduate student researcher and teaching associate with the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. I also work very closely with the Center for Urban Education. Very lucky, blessed, grateful to be a part of the Center for Urban Education, and happy to be here with you all today. I just wanted to allow each of us to take a moment to do the same thing, to introduce ourselves. And so if we could just take maybe about 2 minutes to let everyone know who we're spending our morning with. And then once we do that, I'll take it again and talk with everyone about our agenda and how we'll flow through our session this morning. So if that's okay, I'll ask maybe Dr. Mitchell to get started. And as I said, take about 2 minutes to tell us a bit more about yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Tony Mitchell. I am an associate teaching professor in African American history at Penn State in the Pittsburgh region at the Greater Allegheny campus. I'm also a member of the Equity Advisory Panel. Since 2006, I have been part of the Equity Advisory Panel along with several individuals who are the original members of the Advocates for African American Students in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. And I think it would be important for me to acknowledge those individuals, starting with the late Dr. Barbara Sizemore and other members of the advocates, including Tomanika Howes, Bill Lohman, Dr. Herberta Jackson Lohman, Wanda Henderson, Leroy Hodge, who has passed away, and Kim Jackson Morris. As a member of the EAP, our work is a direct result of their activism, and I'm very pleased to be here today to be part of a conversation in which we can talk about education in the Pittsburgh School District. Thank you.
Marimba.
Good morning. My name is Marimba Malayans, and I am a child of the Hill District, the historic Hill District. It's a little emotional for me to see Dr. Mitchell here, and of course Sala, and then Derek and Devonna, you all here together. It just for me is really kind of like this interesting succession of leadership and passion for social justice, not just at the educational level, but beyond. But anyway, we can talk about that later. I got into community development because I cared about my neighborhood and preserving the cultural legacy of my neighborhood. And the way that that manifested was by saving the built environment. I am also the daughter of Barbara Sizemore, Dr. Barbara Sizemore. And so I was so fortunate to have her in my life from the age of 4 until she passed away when I was in my 20s. And just, you know, feel so incredibly blessed to have had 2 mothers in education who were really about the business of educating Black children. So Margaret Malayans is my biological mother. My father remarried Dr. Barbara Sizemore. And so she raised me from a very young age. And, you know, so I was both the in-house student learning right under her, sometimes because I didn't do my schoolwork, but also under her tutelage as an activist, as I have also been for, again, Dr. Mitchell and Sala. And so the way that my work in education manifests is through helping us to embrace community, through developing our communities and how that connects to all of the different social and educational components of our neighborhood, specifically Black communities. So I'm so happy to be here and bring whatever value I can. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Marimba. Sala?
Good morning. Let me thank you all for inviting me to join this conversation. It's such an important conversation for education in Pittsburgh and for the inauguration of the Juneteenth celebration. This is a very special and important conversation. I'm honored to be on the panel with Tony Mitchell and Marimba. We have been in this struggle for a very long time, and I'm glad to be a part of it. I'm a Hill District native and have been involved in this political fight for quality education since the late 1960s. And the fight goes on. The battle has not changed a great deal, although the names and faces have changed. The battle for quality education continues to this day, and I'm proud and glad to be able to be a part of a panel that will talk about that battle. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for kind of like really getting us started in terms of like setting context for how we'll spend our time together. Derek, would you like to also introduce yourself?
Yes, it is a pleasure to be here. Although some of the letterhead says that I'm a graduate student from Stanford, most of my adulting and grooming I would attribute to my decade in Pittsburgh. And all of the persons who are on the panel have played direct and had direct impact on that experience. And so I am most appreciative. I'm a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm affiliated with the Center for Urban Education there. And now I am affiliated in the Department of Race, Inequality, Language, and Education at the Stanford Graduate School of Education, where most of my research centers around bias, it centers around identity. And the question that I'm asking right now in my research is, when we think about what it means to be Black, and I'm thinking about the many, many years where to be Black was also to be proud and to be persecuted, we have not always allowed every one of our identities to show up in Black spaces. Sometimes we've left women behind. Sometimes we've left the poor behind. Sometimes we've left the uneducated, so-called, behind. And sometimes we've left the queer and trans behind. And so in this new iteration of who we're going to be in this Black space, I'm wondering, under the umbrella of Blackness, will it be refuge for everybody, or will it be refuge for some and rebuke for others? And what does that do and mean for our collective freedom? And so that's the question that I'm asking in most of my research now. Who gets to be Black this time around? And I'm hoping we grapple with that. So I'm very happy to be here. So go ahead, Devon. What we're going to do is, because of the rich nature of each of your experiences, we're going to have a fireside chat with each of you. And so that will last about 10 to 15 minutes. And then during the latter half of our conversation, we will do some crosstalk, and we'll kind of mix the pot together. We want to give you all a chance to kind of really dig into your own experiences. And we have some questions for each of you. And so we're going to start off our panel with Marimba, and Devonna has some prepared questions that I'm going to sit back and listen and enjoy.
Thank you for that, Derek. Good morning, Marimba.
Good morning.
Good. I'm so happy to be here with you today. When you talk about mentors, leadership, those who have been a role model really for me in this work, you are one of the first people that comes to mind. So being able to have this conversation with you is extremely exciting for me, but also like an honor for sure.
Thank you, Devon.
So yeah, I want to really talk to you about, you talked about your mothers as Black educators. That's like where I am right now, deeply embedded in my researches in Black women as educators. And I'm thinking through how they've been able to use race talk as a tool for Black feminist activism. And so again, as you opened, you talked about growing up in this movement, right? Like you had not only your mothers, but your father as an activist, Dr. Jake Malines, right? Dr. Barbara Sizemore, Margaret Malines. So you've had these experiences, I'm sure, and I would love if you could talk about the lessons that you learned as a child in the movement and how those have informed you as an adult in the work that you're doing now.
That is a very deep question for me. But I would say that I'll start with probably my earliest memory of pushing for what was, I suppose, racial justice to some degree. And that would probably be third grade, when we had to do a book report for Black History Month. And, I wanted to write mine on Beethoven. And because I heard that there was some African ancestry, and so, whether correct or incorrect, I wanted to write my book report, and my third grade teacher told me that I was not allowed to. And so I came home and I asked my mother to give me that book called Blacks in Science and Math, so I could take it to school, so I could write the book report that I wanted to write. And my mother, Barbara I'm talking about right now, just had an extensive library, right, at home and at the office. And so she gave me the book. I took it back, and of course, ultimately I wrote my book report on Beethoven, but it landed me in the principal's office, right? And, there had to be a parent-teacher conference about it. And, it just really made it clear to me that, one, that having a strong sense of self-determination was going to be penalized. That was the real lesson, right? Even beyond racial, justice, so to speak, that as a Black girl, as a Black child, that, there was not a lot of leeway in kind of self-expression and learning, that you would be persecuted somehow if you had these expressions around abnormal thoughts, things that aren't taught in schools. And so that's my earliest lesson. But, I would say, my parents, my mothers in particular, were just radically for children, Black children, knowing themselves fully, and for creating space for Black children to be excellent, right? There was just this belief, there was just an expectation that you were excellent. It was an assumption. And the expectation is that you would show up and step into that excellence at every turn. And then, the literature, the teachings, the history, all of that just came in service to that expectation that had already been set. And so, I remember throughout my matriculation, just being in situations where I was trying to advocate for, more expansive cultural teachings. I remember in high school, I'll never forget, it was the first day of Black History Month. And this is when I was at Shenley, and Shenley was a great school, right? But as most schools, it was entrenched in the tradition of not teaching Black history. And so I remember walking into the school, and they launched a new initiative on the first day of Black History Month called the Word of the Day on the main billboard. And the word of the day was collate. I'll never forget that. Wow, like we can't even get the main billboard in the school on the first day of Black History Month. So I was like appalled, right? So I started my own Black history lessons, and I plastered them throughout the school. Of course, that landed me in the first principal's office too. So I did it like a person. I profiled a person, and then I profiled I defined something. So like the first one, of course, was Nat Turner. And then the teaching was an Ankh, right? And so that landed me in the principal's office again. And I went down to the school board. By this point, right, I was literally under the tutelage of Dr. Mitchell, Cliff Sykes, Dr. Akbar, right? And they would have a study group at the University of Pittsburgh where they would just, teach you African history, African American history. And so, so I'd already gotten that at home, but I was also the broader community also had these kind of pockets of people who would just avail themselves to the community to learn in a group setting. And I think it was called the Imhotep Society.
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
It was the Imhotep Society. And so, I was learning not just at home, but in broader community. And that's why it's so, for me, almost emotional to be here, because I can just see the succession of leadership, right? And I know that you and Derek will do the same, right, as you pay it forward. But at any rate, so I went, by that point, I learned how to activate, because, my mom, and I'm speaking of Barbara in particular, like she taught me how to advocate at a very early age. When you go to the microphone, have your 3 points written out, go through your 3 points, so I had been doing that from middle school, whenever I had an issue. And so I went down to the school board and I advocated that, to the school board, that the focus of the school should not be a word of the day on the first day of Black History Month, but that we should be using that real estate in our school to really promote, Black excellence, Black history. And so those are two memories, and I'll share one more if we have time, Devon. I'm going to do a time check. Yeah. One more memory that I have is when in my freshman year, maybe it was my sophomore year, they had started a program called Classics at my high school. And the Classics program was for mostly children from the neighborhood, right? Now, because Shelly was a magnet school, so you had like the high tech program, you had the international studies program, you had the international baccalaureate program, and then you had Classics, which is where most of the mainstream kids went. But they were almost all Black. I would argue predominantly male. And I remember that other people in the school started calling them the basement kids because the Classics program was in the basement, right? And I was just appalled, that this was allowed to happen, even that that the administration had not been more thoughtful about even where kids should be located, right? In the building, given the program. And so I remember going back to the board to talk about that. I remember going to community meetings, right? And so while I always felt protected at home, I always knew that my parents, my father, my mothers would have my back. I mean, they were all about accountability. Don't get me wrong. They knew that I was born with the gift of one's mouth, right? And so, it wasn't all them at all. It was me sometimes too. But I always felt like on these kinds of issues that they would have my back and that they would be able to go to the school and they would advocate on my behalf. And I know that that is extraordinarily rare. And that there are so many children there's not an expectation of excellence. There is not access to literature, teaching, mentors. There's not proper education. And yet they are no more or less gifted in many cases than I. And so, I just think of how much brilliance we've lost, right, to a system that does not know how to educate Black children. And I frequently say, I am certain that the cure for cancer is in a jail cell somewhere in America. I'm certain of it, right? Because there's just, we've just lost so many people to a system that's ineffective. And so, I'll stop there. I don't know if that answered your question directly, but.
Oh, most certainly. You've answered my question and some others that I didn't even have to ask. So thank you for that, Marimba. I think, this last point that you've ended on in terms of advocacy for children is so important to me because like I at a young age had an inkling and a feeling in my gut about things that just were not right. And I too had family who supported me in my questioning and in my challenging of leadership, and that was okay. I was allowed to ask questions even at home, and that for a lot of in a lot of ways transitioned into the work that I did with and on behalf of my peers at school. So I can relate to that, and I think a lot about how a lot of young people right now don't have that sort of support system, or even the knowledge that they can speak up on behalf of themselves and their peers. I also think a lot about, I also went to Shenley, graduated from Shenley, and I think about when you talk about the basement kids, right? That never felt right to us. And so the idea that there were adults placed in leadership who thought that even just the messaging, as you said, that these students could be in a space with very little access to sunlight coming in classrooms, and that they were, for one, relegated to the basement, but then like segregated in their own classes, all of those things that were very problematic to young people. So we know that adults know better. And I guess I'll end on the point about us being in a system that does not know how to educate Black children. And I would even push it further to say that in a lot of ways doesn't want to or see value in educating Black children, right? So there's certainly much work to be done there. And when we talk about leadership succession, these sorts of conversations, I think, are what prepares us, myself, Derek, and others who we've been working with to continue that work.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Thank you so much, Marimba. Derek, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much. Marimba, thank you. Just to hear you, Marimba, as you share your story, you made a quick note and you said, I'm sure that you, Derek, and Devonna will pay this work forward. What's interesting to me is in the tradition, in these Black traditions, that one comment you made was a both, I know you can and you must. In that one comment, you know, I know you can and you must. And it's subtle, but it's also powerful. And so I appreciate, and I know Devonna appreciates, one, the encouragement, and two, just the push that it is necessary work and it's right now work. So thank you.
Thank you.
And as we pivot to, I want to say, Dr. Udeen's, Professor Udeen, there's not enough to kind of put the right sort of honorific in front of, and I Mr. Sala's name. I'm young, and that's what we do in Black communities. But if there's anybody that I could call on to say is a griot for our people, you know, the people who tell our stories, who know our histories, and share them in very powerful ways, and those stories are community sustaining because you hold a wealth of knowledge there. And so you've been, Sala, on the front lines as a person who has pushed the system, and you've also been a person who has been part of the system through either elected office or leading strong nonprofits like CORO, Center for Civic Leadership. Tell me what it has meant for you over the years to balance those positions as outsider and insider, and how you hold that tension and still make progress.
It's a good question. But like Marimba, I think that it benefits all of us to access our own personal history in education. Marimba has a very, very rich history. My history in education begins a little earlier than Marimba's. I was raised in the Lower Hill District on a street called Fullerton Street. And my mother was the housekeeper for the Catholic school and church that was across the street from us. And as the housekeeper, they allowed her to enroll her children in the school without having to pay tuition. That's where I met August Wilson and Rob Penny and Walt Little. We were all little darkies in their school together. And that led to eventually a violent confrontation in the cafeteria of Central High School, where Black History Month was greeted by a very nasty note left on the table of the Black students who all ate together at that table every day. And the note said, "Welcome to Black History, welcome to Negro History Week. Invite a nigger to lunch today." we took the note to the other side of the cafeteria and turned it out, turned the tables upside down, beat up every little white boy we could find. And as a result, I got invited to transfer to another school. And I went from there to Shenley High School, which although Shenley was a comparatively better, academically better high school than many of the other high schools, my personal experience at Shenley High School was not great. It was devastating, quite frankly. It introduced me to Black classism. And of course, by that time, we had moved to the public housing projects. And we didn't know that the Black community in Shenley Heights, which was nicknamed Sugar Top, had fought against the public housing being built so close to their neighborhood because they were convinced that it would lower the real estate value of their homes. But they lost that fight. The city decided to build the public housing there anyway. And so the children who went to Shenley, who were from the projects, were looked down upon and castigated. And that resulted in me not wanting to learn. I didn't want to be in the classroom. I didn't like the teachers. They didn't like me. And it was a very confrontational experience until I was again invited to transfer to a different school. But the teacher, the counselor, explained to me that God made us all, and he loves us all. But he didn't make us all the same. He endowed some of us with certain kinds of talent, and some had talent in sports, others had talent in the arts, others had talent in their brains, and some had talent in their hands, and they could fix things with their hands. And she suggested that I obviously did not have my talent endowment in my brains, so perhaps I could discover my talent in my hands if I transferred to Conley Trade School. Conley Trade School, in my recollection, was what I considered to be special class. The only kids who went to Conley Trade School were the ones who God did not endow with brain talent, so they could learn to become plumbers or carpenters or mechanics or something like that, where they could work with their hands. And I decided I'm not going to the special school. I'm going to stop this education journey right here. And I dropped out of Shenley High School and went with some friends of mine to the land of milk and honey. We drove from Pittsburgh to Harlem. I ran away from home at the age of 16. That was my introduction to education. When I came back from a Freedom Rider experience in Mississippi. I came back in 1968. The fight that we had, there was an organization started by Bowie Hayden and some other activists in Homewood who had created an organization called Blacks for Quality Education, BQE. And the fight that we had to start with was a fight for, it was a political fight. Because at that time, there were no representative members of the Black community on the school board, because the school board was appointed by the City of Pittsburgh Commonwealth Court. And so our first fight was a political fight to change the way the school board was composed from a judicial appointment school board to an elected school board. And the beginning of the elected school board started with creating districts that would send representatives to the school board from those districts. And the first representative that the Hill District sent to the school board was Marimba's daddy, Dr. Jake Malyans, who also happened to be my best friend. We had a lot of great times laughing and eating fish sandwiches and chicken wings in the Crawford Grill. So that political nexus between education and politics, interestingly, is still a frontline battle today. Only we have a very difficult time getting education, as important as education has been to our community since Reconstruction. We still have a difficult time getting Black political leaders to put education on the front burner of politics. Education is still like a stepchild. And as a result, our fight for quality education is weaker. And one of the things we have to continue to do is to not only educate teachers about the quality of education, we've also got to encourage Black political leaders and Black religious leaders to put education on the front political burner, because it needs to be there. Politically, the strategy of education as an important political and economic endeavor is absolutely critical. And so part of our fight today is to move education to the front burner and win the political battle for quality education within the school district, to get school board members and school administration who are in a Black majority to put quality education on the front burner, not just be satisfied with education as a the reason why I got involved in the school board, and I'm going to stop in a minute, was because the poor quality of education in Pittsburgh is considered to be okay. We don't insist on quality education. Just barely adequate education is okay. And I believe that's deep down because I don't believe that the system, that is the system of education, really honestly believes that poor Black children can succeed in a curriculum of quality education. They don't believe it. And so education has to be raised not just to be on the front burner politically, but the quality of that education has to be raised. And just as we are about to raise the quality of education, the right wing comes back with a battle to prevent us from including honest history and honest education in education. And so we have to fight that battle as well. So we are fighting multiple battles on different fronts. And that's why I'm happy to be in such company as I am this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we're happy to hear that perspective. Before I turn it to Devonna, what your comments make me think about is because of your longevity, you've seen the systems from, you've been inside the belly of the beast, and you've kind of punched the beast in the stomach when you're outside the system. But I say that to say, I believe there are people like you and Marimba and Dr. Mitchell who can really see if an effort or a reform effort can pass the sniff test. You've seen the writing on the wall, even when the language has been changed. I believe your experience is really helpful as we move toward grooming new leaders, helping them see what's around the corner even before it comes. And so I appreciate your perspective and what your comment about Pittsburgh, and I think about Pittsburgh K-12 in the context of the booming university traditions that are happening in the city. And you have to ask the question, if the quality of our Research One institutions continues to rise in the context of a struggling K-12 system, for whom is the strengthening of Carnegie Mellon? For whom is the strengthening of the University of Pittsburgh? Do those institutions anticipate that the majority of children from the Hill District and Homewood can attend those universities? And if not, where will those children go? And for what are they being prepared? Are they being prepared to access the richness of these universities? Or are we seeing that our school system is really making a statement that the world that we're creating, this beautiful city, is not for everybody? At least the pathway for them won't be through K-12. So I'm happy to jump into that a little bit longer, but Devonna is going to lead us into some listening and learning with Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you for that, Derek. And thank you, Sala, because Sala, you said one thing that I hope we'll be able to come back to in a little bit, and it has to do with the distractions that are thrown at us, right? And so when you think about political strategy, I know that you are well versed at recognizing a distraction when you see one, right? So I'd love to talk more about, if we have an opportunity, this fight or maybe pseudo fight over critical race theory. And when you talk about truth, educational and historical truths being included or excluded or villainized in education. So let's make sure that we come back to that. Dr. Mitchell, as you introduced yourself, you talked a bit about what is now the Pittsburgh Public Schools Equity Advisory Panel. And you talked a bit about the history of that and how that came to be as one of the components of the conciliation agreement that was fought for by the original advocates for African American education. And so when, kind of going along with all of this conversation of Black educational histories and how things have transitioned over time and the wins that we've seen and some of the losses that we've experienced. I'd love for you to talk about kind of the history again of the Equity Advisory Panel and talk a bit about what parents and community members ought to know when we start thinking about organizing for educational equity.
Okay. First, thank you again. And it would be important for me to make an acknowledgement of the gigantic leadership that Baba Salahuddin has played, not only in movements here in Pittsburgh, but also movements on a national level. I'm of the mind state that someone inside of CUESEF in the near future needs to consider doing a dissertation on the life and legacy of Baba Salahuddin. I consider him my elder in this struggle. And to my dear sister, Marimba, I have known you since you were a child, a teenager, and to see you and hear you today, it truly is an honor for me to hear you speak so glowingly. And also you make me think about that Imhotep community, the study group, and you are a exemplary model of those great mothers and women that you have had in your life. So it's truly an honor for me to be here today on this panel with both of you. In talking about the Equity Advisory Panel, I think it would be important for me, specifically if there's some folk with us today who are not familiar with the advocates for African-American students in the Pittsburgh public schools, as well as how the EAP came into existence. It's also important to recognize, as both Baba Sala and Sister Marimba have pointed out, that Pittsburgh has actually practiced educational apartheid for decades in the education of Black children. And if we don't look at that as something that's systemic and structural, then I think we're missing a very critical component of why it's so difficult to educate our children for high achievement. And clearly today, we are probably faced more than ever before, as Baba Sala pointed out, with the need for our political and our religious leaders to become more engaged in prioritizing the education of every child in the city of Pittsburgh. When you look at the advocates led by the late Dr. Sizemore, formed in the late 80s and early 90s to address the failures of the Pittsburgh public schools to educate Black children, that inspired the lawsuit that was filed in 1992. I'm going to give you a quick summary, but in looking at that lawsuit, it was filed because at that time, the school district had hired a white superintendent over a more qualified African-American superintendent. And so as a result of this kind of egregious decision made by the board, there were other issues that were clearly in front of the African-American community. But there were 5 issues that were filed in that lawsuit. And those 5 issues were hiring a white superintendent over a more qualified African-American candidate, and in the school system itself, extremely disproportionate suspensions and expelling of African-American students at such a rate, it not only was alarming, it's part of what we could talk about today as fueling mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline. There's no doubt about it. And I think Sister Marimba, she mentioned that in her comments. The other issue is looking at grade distribution. If I recall correctly, during that particular period in the 1980s and early 1990s, the average grade for many students was D and F throughout the district, specifically at the middle school and high school levels. So these are 3 of the issues, along with maintaining a tremendous achievement disparity, and Baba Sala spoke to that. And in looking at the other issue that became front and center inside of the complaint was the exclusion of African-American students as early as elementary, at the elementary level, from participation in programs that prepare them to be high achievers, as well as participate in programs such as gifted programs and advanced placement programs. So with that lawsuit being filed in 1992, by 1996, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission determined that there wasn't enough standing on the issue of the concerns around hiring the white superintendent over the more qualified Black candidate. But the other 4 issues went into, I guess, civil litigation across, I think, about 12 years. So in 2006, that superintendent, Mark Roosevelt, decided that he would entertain going forward with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission and looking at the lawsuit as part of what the advocates wanted to have included in the conciliation agreement, which found that there were about 94 issues of concerns. This lawsuit produced 94 issues of concerns across 6 distinct areas inside of the school district. But as a result of that particular finding, it was also agreed that an equity advisory panel would be formed. And in 2006, I was selected to be part of the equity advisory panel, along with Tomanika Howes, Wanda Henderson, who's the current chair, Ia Salida Hickman, Dr. James Stewart, a scholar in Africana Studies, the late Dean Larry Davis from the University of Pittsburgh, and part of the original conciliation agreement panel was Mark Connor, and he was replaced a few years later by Maria Searcy. And today we also have Kirk Holbrook as part of the equity advisory panel. Part of what we did early on in our analysis of the issues, we identified 8 major areas. And in identifying these 8 major areas, and I'm going to share them with you quickly, these 8 major areas became the foundation of the work that we have put before the district since 2007 with the last 3 superintendents. And as recently as yesterday, we contend that the district has not met these issues, that the district continues to fail to meet these issues. Number 1 was our recommendation that the district implement culturally relevant, responsive education throughout the entire district. Number 2, the development of a parent empowerment and engagement plan. And that is something that continues to be difficult, that creates a climate that sees parents as very central and significant to the education of their children, an inclusive climate and culture for parents to engage in the district in partnership with the education of their children. Number 3, we felt that it was very critical that the district develop principles, with the majority of the teachers in the district being white and female and coming from middle-class backgrounds and environments. We felt that they need professional development. And that is an issue that continues to be a significant issue today. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, concerns about discipline, concerns about the disproportionate disciplining and expelling of Black children and Black students. And these, we felt, were practices in teachers' perceptions of the potential of our children to excel. And both Baba Sala and Sister Marimba have spoken to that. One other issue that we felt was very significant at that time was the reality of school violence in the buildings. And during that particular time, we felt that there was an underreporting of how closing schools and shifting students from one building to another building across a bridge was escalating conflicts among students. And certainly that is a very serious issue that we felt the district needed to address. The other 3 issues were professional teacher development, as I mentioned. And the reason why we felt that was so important is we felt that the trainers and consultants who should be brought in to train these teachers should be Black consultants. We have given the district upwards of probably 40 consultants on a national level, many here in Pittsburgh who know our children, who understand the neighborhoods and the composition of families and communities. We feel that these individuals should be brought into the district to do the training of teachers. And we also felt that something that was lacking throughout the district was an evaluation of their structures, an evaluation of how they're going to manage change. And certainly both Sister Marimba and Baba Sala can speak to that. And lastly, to your point or your question something that I think we all believe is very significant to changing not only the climate and the culture, is greater community involvement, is greater community engagement. And so these were the 8 major issues that we put before the school board and the superintendent in 2007. And these issues remain the major issues that we present to them in our meetings with them. And lastly, most recently, as this month, the Pittsburgh Business Times report of achievement over the last decade found that the Pittsburgh Public School District ranks 92 out of 102 districts reporting their data to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So I hope that I've given you an overview of the EAP, and hopefully this will be helpful in moving forward our conversation.
Absolutely, it has been. I mean, this thorough history is just mind-blowing to me. You said 90, how many concerns were found?
94 issues were found by the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission in their assessment of the lawsuit that was filed in 1992. And it's also important to note that since 2006, when we started our work with the district 4 times, in 2011, in 2013, in 2015, and in 2020, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission has found in our favor of our continuing concerns that this district has failed to make meaningful progress.
So I guess before we move on to our broader conversation, I guess I'd like for all of us to start thinking about, so then what do community members do? We're talking right now about, to some degree, people who have professional education in the field of education and kind of have some history in terms of like how to approach these concerns that children are living every day. But what do we say to parents and community members who do care? I think it was both Usala and Marva talked about this notion that parents and community members are just not engaged because they just don't care about these issues, that education has been placed on the back burner politically and even, in a lot of ways by teachers themselves in terms of like having to manage the day-to-day concerns that are taking place in schools. But how do we actually get parents and community members to see hope in activism and in organizing when we're facing 94 concerns found by the state? Where do we begin, and how do we bring parents and community members along in this fight? And I guess that question first is posed to Dr. Mitchell, and then we can kind of open that up to the larger panel.
Well, thank you for coming back to me. And one of our advocates and EAP members frequently starts our meeting by asking one question: and how are the children today? Mm-hmm. And our response is, the children are not well. And so in addressing your question, if we know that our children aren't well, the alarm has already been sounded. We have had the scholars, we've had the activists come before us for decades who are telling us that our children are not being prepared for the future. But I think we have to do more at the grassroots level. We've got to knock on some doors. And as Baba Sala pointed out, we really have to challenge and hold accountable our elected officials, our political leaders, our religious leaders, to care more and do more about not only the education of this generation, but also the education of future generations. Our children are not well. And COVID-19, before COVID-19, these issues were there. And post-COVID, these issues have deepened in terms of its effect on families. And families need support. Families need resources. We need a major focus on getting more equity into the homes and neighborhoods and communities of our children.
I want to jump in here. Thank you. That was so eloquently stated. 2 things. One is we have to remember we are now dealing with parents who have suffered the same tremendously poor quality education through the public education system, right? We're on like the third generation, and when we talk about Sala, even right further back. But there was a time where you could get a decent, right, education. I don't want to say all schools, like are unable to provide a somewhat decent education, but generally speaking, from a systemic level, we are failing so miserably. And the parents and the grandparents have gone through this same school system now. So in many cases, they may not even be aware of what quality education looks like because they themselves were so removed from that experience. And so sometimes you have to have an example of what you're fighting for in order to have a goal. And I think that that's a part of the challenge, that there's not a clear goal. Now we just have the expectation that this is what it is. So I think that's one challenge, right, is helping to reacclimate people to the purpose of public education and what it can be. And some, we may have to get on a bus, right, and visit some schools, or we may have to do a tour even locally, right, to an effective classroom, right, or to the top performing teachers in our district, so that people understand what quality looks like versus what poor quality is. And then the other thing that I want to add is, and I feel really passionately about this, this gets me in trouble all the time. I think it's good trouble, but it's trouble. I am fiercely passionate about holding elected officials accountable and about public institutions and governments using taxpayer money responsibly, using taxpayer money for what it is intended to do. And there is an egregious failure right now on the part of our public education system and what it is supposed to do. And while I understand all of the funding may not always be there for everything, for all of the things, there are some very clear things that can be done to improve the quality of education for Black children. And I'm going to be specific on something really simple that can be done to inform and educate families. The school system is frequently sending emails, notices, robocalls, right, for days off or, computer shortages for COVID, whatever it is. But you never get that email, that phone call, that notification saying, come to a district meeting of parents to talk about how we can improve the quality of education for your children, right? You never get that message. And I believe that governments and bodies have to be accountable to the people, but they have to be accountable to themselves as well. Like, why haven't you convened the parents of this district with the community, with the advisory panel, with their elected official, to have a deep dive conversation and a planning summit that leads to an implementation plan that leads to action, right? And so that's a frustration of mine, because we as community members are always kind of, scrambling at the grassroots level to hold these huge institutions accountable, and it's not a sustainable model.
That's right.
Right? It's just not a sustainable, there's not enough energy, there's not enough money, there's not enough time, there's not enough bandwidth. And so we have to figure out a way to shift that accountability back to the proper place and to make sure that folks are held accountable using the pocketbook that they have that comes from our tax dollars.
That's right.
So that's what I would add to that part.
One of the things that, if I could add to the dialogue here, people wonder why parents are not engaged, and many of the answers that we get point back to the parents themselves. But the reality is parents are not welcome in public education, especially the parents of the children who are being failed by public education. They get messages of various kinds of messages that tell them they are not welcome in the school buildings. They are not welcome in the public hearing meetings. They're not welcome in the legislative activity. That we send them that message because the school district, the institution, the bureaucracy is terrified of parents learning that their children are not being educated. And one of the things that might get both the political leaders and the parents engaged is if the right wing of American society and American politics is successful in making the kind of education that Dr. Mitchell is trying to introduce throughout the school curriculum, that's getting ready to be made illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Your kind of truth-telling is about to be made illegal, and it will not be tolerated within the academic structure of public education in Pennsylvania and in the United States. That's what's coming down the block, and we better get ready for it because they're going to have to make an example somewhere, and the kind of expertise that Dr. Mitchell brings to the struggle for quality education is exactly the kind of target that they may choose as an example of how organizations like Dr. Mitchell's have to be made an example of. One other thing I would add quickly, we don't know yet how to fight internally within the Black family. We don't know how to conduct that fight because every time we attack Black inequality and Black inadequacy, it gets blocked because we can't have this fight because you're attacking somebody Black. You cannot attack the Pittsburgh school curriculum because the superintendent is Black and the majority of the board is Black. And yeah, it is true that the children can't read. It is true that they are failing, but we cannot attack them because they're Black. And until we learn how to get past that argument, it's going to be difficult to get our hands on control of the curriculum pre-K to college and change it so that the education that our children receive prepares them for life after high school.
Brilliantly stated. Thank you for that, Saul. I completely agree that oftentimes is the barrier that keeps us from real accountability. It really is. And I want to add also is we underutilize our legal tools. That's something that folks who are effective within the existing political system who never want our children to know this are really effective at, and that's utilizing their political tools. Now, we did it to get the mandate for the panel, right? but we should revisit utilizing our legal tools. And I think that's something that, particularly in the Black community, we are oftentimes very, discouraged from going that far, right? It's viewed as divisive and scary and unreasonable, right? We'll be told all of those types of things the moment we start talking about utilizing our legal tools and the law on our own behalf. And I think that that is a serious mistake. And I think that the more that we practice utilizing our legal options, the more results we will see.
Mm-hmm. I agree with both of the perspectives that are being shared here, because it's wisdom. And I think everyone that is aware of this battle that has been taking place in Pittsburgh for a long time is aware that we are actually looking at people from within our own neighborhoods and communities and asking them to care about our children in a way that will change their life trajectory. And that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about their futures. And the example that you gave, Brother Derek, a few minutes ago about what's going to happen around the Hill District, around our communities at Carnegie Mellon and Pitt and our other local colleges and university, does it include anticipating that our children will be sitting in those classrooms, being taught by people who care about them and people who see them as the global think tank for tomorrow?
And part of what you are saying there, Dr. Mitchell, reminds me to circle back to Marimba's efforts in the Hill District. We often think about the people in the Hill District, or when you grow up and you become quote unquote successful, where do you move? You know, the neighborhood that is supposed to reflect your success. And there are a few people and a few African Americans who are looking at the Hill District as a place for Black people who are also quote unquote successful, who are also contributing to society, and who are also who have options about where they might live. But as part of that, imagining our futures, the schools are a huge part of that. Will the schools get better once the residents change? And we've seen that there's a direct correlation between gentrifying neighborhoods, between quality of schools. Magnet schools, they have a name for that on purpose, because they are to attract the people that you want to go there. So you find yourself in a magnet school, but you cannot access the quality programs in that program. And so Marimba's fight has been really extraordinary to imagine the place that everyone else has discarded or left as the place of possibility. And so, Marimba, can you talk about that your eyes have never looked outside of 15219 as a place of possibility. And so I really want to hear you talk about even in the context of what looks like under-resourced and chronic disinvestment, you still see beauty in the Hill District, and you anchor that in the quality of the schools.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I do believe, you know, maybe I'm a bit naive, but, you know, I just believe that there's so much brilliance in our community, and so much brilliance in our actual built environment, our physical communities. And, you know, it's a complex question, because I'm going to layer it with what Sala said earlier about the perceptions that existed around Sugar Top and the classism, right? And the comments around the Hill District being a destination for people who could live wherever they choose, Black people in particular in this region. And by the way, I do believe that Pittsburgh will never be the city that it can be without the Hill District fully being the community that it should be.
Amen.
There is just impossible. You can't have 1,100 acres of land between your commerce district and your university knowledge center, and, you know, and not invest in that fully and completely through the lens of equity, specifically racial justice, and think that you're going to have a desirable city of the future. It's not going to happen. And that's why Black talent doesn't stay here for longer than 2 or 3 years. You know, there you would be outside of the norm with regard to how long you stayed and invested in the community. But I say that to say that it's really important that as we rebuild community, this is kind of an internal conversation, as we rebuild community, that we take those lessons of the past and we don't make the same mistakes, right? So as those who are choosing to return come to the neighborhood, they have to embrace the idea that excellence is not, defined by your income, and brilliance and talent is not restricted to how many zeros come behind your paycheck. And how we build within our community and invest in one another is going to be critically important. And it's an issue that's starting to become more and more obvious as we are experiencing more pressures, market pressures from the perimeter of the neighborhood, right? Who do we want to be when we grow up, right? Our community collectively said we want to build upon the African-American cultural legacy. Well, that legacy is not, again, solely defined by our those who are of the upper echelon, right? It's a broad and diverse group of folks. And I think that is the test of the Hill District in the future. Relative to how the schools play into it. I have, obviously I went to Madison Elementary, Malines Middle School, and Shinley, right? So I grew up in the Hill District, went away for college, and then, came back to the city of Pittsburgh and ended up, at the Hill City C. But, I frequently try to engage, particularly at Malines, because that's, the middle and high school in the area, and where I can, I guess foreseeably see, immediate impact. And I am often frustrated, right? While I think that people have good intentions and wanting to have you come and speak and those types of things, there's really no strategy to connect the children to opportunity. There's no strategy, and that's always super clear to me, right? It's always like an ad hoc effort to, get kids exposed. And that's why kids keep on falling through the cracks, because there's no safeguard for them. There's no thoughtful strategy to get them from A to Z. And so, whoever can make it, jump over 16 letters at a time, right? That's who ends up going to college, maybe, right? Or a trade school and having a quality of life. The rest of folks end up in low-wage jobs, maybe a middle-income job, and locked into probably a low to low moderate income life, right? Which has all types of other impacts on one's health and so forth and so on. So, so I think that we don't do enough internal comprehensive planning around how schools connect to community development, how green space connects to community development and health, and grocery stores and all of those things that most people in most communities take for granted. And so I think that that's work that has to be done, but it's hard work because we often try to do it at the school level, and it's really a systems level issue. And you can, even if you have impact in that school, when that school leader changes, you're right back to ground zero. And so we have to address this on the systems level, which is why I keep pointing back to the school district. I want them to leverage their resources and our tax dollars to organize with us and to hold themselves accountable. And that takes really brave leadership. It takes really brave leadership to say, I'm convening people to tell me I'm doing a bad job, right? And to work with them to come up with a solution. But that's in essence what leadership is.
Let me ask you, let me throw another question on the table, if that's okay, Derek and Ivana. Do you remember in Roots when after emancipation, when Africans, Americans who had been enslaved were now allowed to get married, and the sister came skipping down the dirt road, barefooted, but happy, and she was showing that she had a ring on her finger, and she was saying, I's married now. I's married now. That reminds me of the fact that Us got a black mayor now.
Mm.
Us got a black mayor now. Don't all these problems go away? What is going to be our dialogue with Mayor-to-be Ed Gainey as he assembles his strategy and his team to address these questions? We've been waiting for a black mayor for generations. He's here at the front door. What do we say to him?
Your question makes me think about, and I guess, I don't have the answer to your question right away, but I hope this might help us to begin to think about what it is that we want of this new administration. I've been a part of several conversations lately that have to do with this cyclical pattern of reform. And, we can liken that to the cyclical pattern of, our political patterns, right? Things that are, the ebbs and flows of such. And simultaneously, I've been a part of conversations where people say, just blow it up, start over. We need not continue to revisit these old ways of doing, repackage them, right? And expect, for one, that children and their families don't know the difference, right? Because they'll tell you, oh, we've been here before. We've heard of this before. They just put a new name on it. So there's this, I guess one camp maybe that is constantly searching for a new reform effort, right? They're marketed to us at every turn. But then there's another conversation that has to do with just start abandoning all of those things that feel familiar and starting over. So I guess the other part of this conversation, I guess the one that really where I am right now is, while I definitely do not want to see another pattern of reform come through and, give us the hope that something just might change with this new way of doing things, I also question what happens to families with lower incomes, with fewer resources, fewer networks. What happens to them when we blow it all up? So I'm wondering how you all might respond to that. We're coming to a close pretty soon, but I'm wondering how you all might respond to, what do we do? Do we continue to kind of chase after these new models that look and feel better? Or do we just abolish it all and start over? And what happens if we do that?
I'll give that a shot. And then really quickly, generally speaking, I believe, take the best and leave the rest is kind of a good way to think about these types of things. Take the best and leave the rest. So I think it's against the African tradition to not reflect on the past and to not practice Sankofa. And I find that we are really struggling with that within our community on that right now. And it concerns me because I think it's one of the strengths of our community is our ability to consistently look back and take forward the valuable lessons. So that's my contribution to this part of the conversation. I tend to be more on the radical reform end, but in the context of the work that's been done and the building blocks. If you've already got a legal mandate that says you should do these things, then use that to advance those things through the same legal measures as you restructure things in a very radical way that can feel like starting over.
I will take a stab at that, knowing that Baba Sala will give us the wisdom to bring it home. I agree with you, Sister Marimba. I don't think the way some people talk about reform will get us there, but because I believe that reform is not radical transformation, but radical reform could lead to powerful transformation if we have someone coming into a leadership position like a future mayor who demands that this district change and meet its accountability to every child, to every family, to every neighborhood and community. So somewhere between radical transformation and the reality that if we don't see it occurring within a relatively reasonable period of time, we need to take control of the education of our children. We need to be committed to do what other folk do. They make sure their children receive the education that they want them to receive. And I don't think we've done that. So that's my response to that question.
I don't think that we have, either in the struggles of Black people since Reconstruction or during and since Reconstruction, nor in the lessons of the African liberation movement on the continent, do we have examples of successful transformation by blowing up the history and starting over.
Right.
that has not been successful anywhere. As difficult as it is, Nelson Mandela, I think, and other African liberation leaders tell us that we must stop. If you have to stop and look over your shoulder every once in a while to see how far you've come from and to contemplate on where you've got to go, that's okay, but don't stay too long. As Marimba said, take the best and leave the rest and keep building on those blocks that past generations have left for us. We have inherited those building blocks, and they expect us to learn and grow from their sacrifices and move the ball forward, and not become impatient, but to have faith in the victory of our struggle and to keep moving forward.
And we should leave no children behind.
Leave no children behind.
Irrespective of their income. I want to be really clear about that.
Mm-hmm. And I think with that wisdom, I would probably like to close my comments with a quote, a really short quote from Dr. Sizemore in her book, Walking in Circles, The Black Struggle for School Reform. This is what she said: the curriculum of America's educational system is filled with distortions, omissions, and false statements regarding the African and African American. Experience and education both have convinced me that schools can change if the actors inside it are committed to high achievement as a high priority and are willing to work together to achieve the end. I think all of us have said that today. On one side, you have a community that's pushing forward, saying to this district, you need to listen to us. We can help you get better. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, as Baba Sala said, and I think you both have said, there's this sense of, well, we don't value, or we can't, or we're a little bit uncomfortable with how you're saying it. But I think somewhere in between is the work that the wisdom of Dr. Sizemore gave us in Walking in Circles.
Sure.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for what you've given us today. Dr. Mitchell, you're using Dr. Sizemore's words to kind of close us out in a way that I couldn't have done better. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass it to Derek to kind of just transition us to the next phase of today. And again, I just want to express my gratitude to each of you for all that you've given us.
Thank you. It was great being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I want to express my gratitude and just how encouraging and humbling it is to be in conversation with you, to be able to listen to your histories as we think about forging a future. Some of the key things I think about is how we have allowed other people to pathologize our own people and make them the problem and the cause of their own conditions. And what I hear us talking about how to bring everybody forward, how to leave nobody behind, that's really key as we think about who gets to inherit this future that we're trying to really strategize for and implement. And so I thank you all for your work. Thank you for your sustained work. It's really appreciated. As we get ready to pivot here, we were going to take a short 10-minute break before we get into our last scheduled CUESEF event. We will have some remarks from Dr. Elon Dancy, who's responsible for the vision and execution for CUESEF. And if you've been here since Wednesday, you will realize that it is hard to have a crescendo moment. But it's been done. And I already claim it being done because we had Dr. Vanessa Siddle Walker, who is going to come, author of Horace Tate, The Lost Education of Horace Tate. It's hard to be the end of this week, but I think there is no one more suited to do this than Dr. Siddle Walker. If you've not been able to see or hear from everybody, I think in her comments, she will reflect really a synthesis of the power that we've had this week. And so I invite you to stay connected and enjoy the break, but get ready to hear the powerful words of Dr. Vanessa Siddle Walker.
Can I ask a technical question?
Yeah.
Do we have to log off and log back on, or can we just stay connected here? Because I may not be successful in getting back on. It was such a hard time getting on in the first place. I don't want to let it go.
Well, I think between the few of us, we've got your numbers and we've got emails. And so if there is a disconnect, we will correct the disconnect. So we'll just stay on for now. Stay on for now. We'll
Okay.
make sure. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Blessings to everyone.
Blessings.
Blessings.
See you all soon.